Cultivation notes for Fruticum rhys, commonly known as the gristlebloom orchid. A popular feature in any mortal garden, the striking petals that spring from the stems of the gristlebloom are certainly dramatic. Stretched and straining as they are in a kaleidoscope of reds and pinks and browns around the pale cream of bony stalk. While conditions for proper development can be tricky to get precisely right, caution should be exercised as, should an ideal environment be created, this plant can grow and grow and grow. A 2024 study found that 17.7% of people ages 10 to 19 committed some form of self-harm in that year. This growing pattern owes itself in large part to the prevalence of unhealthy and dangerous body standards, promoting self-harm practices, such as those seen in a narrator's journey through a twisted garden. We must realize that self-harm is more common and more dangerous than we think, especially among this community, where we strive for excellence and the perfection of the self above all else. But there's nothing aspirational about the practice of self-harm, and the end of that road offers us nothing worthwhile. A reminder and a warning in The Gardener by Jonathan Sims. The soil should be prepared first, a rich and earthy cocktail of insecurity and self-hatred that allows the roots to twist and contort freely. The temperature should be kept to the steady, humid warmth of air conditioners, struggling to cope with the perspiration of a dozen bodies pushing themselves too hard, while the lights must be kept at a harsh, fluorescent glare. Above all, the deepest fear must be laced throughout what the gristlebloom orchid is fed, that they're not enough, that their inadequacies are embedded all the way into their flesh, and that they must always and forever be more. This unspoken terror can be viewed in the intricate lattices that marble the petals of a well-cared-for gristlebloom, as it expands and swells and grows to its full and bulbous potential. Never let it believe itself good enough, and continue always to ensure the body it is certain it must attain is that impossible, distended mess to which will endlessly contort itself, until it dominates your garden in its sheer, impossible, beautiful mass. Even if there were mirrors in this place, Rhys cannot possibly recognize himself, not because anything that might have once registered as a human body has long since blossomed into sinewy flowers and muscles and burst skin, but because, were he to see himself, the only image in his mind would be the him he was so afraid to be. And the gristlebloom orchid grows. The agonies of this gore-streaked orchid are pointedly exquisite, as it willingly and keenly pushes its physical form past any recognizable point of pain and shuddering anxiety, till it towers over your garden, dripping blood and bitter sweat. Cultivation notes for Griselium patricia, commonly known as the bone rose. While the gristlebloom orchid may be the most eye-catching of the plants you will find in the mortal garden, the bone rose is perhaps the most delicate. Thin and brittle, it is constantly on the verge of collapsing under its own weight, even as its ossified stems reach and twist and stretch in a desperate attempt for closeness. The soil for the bone rose must be thoroughly rotten, a mulch of corrupted romanticism turned toxic, watered by an uncertain desire that curls back upon the roots and feeds into it a single, constant, pulsing thought, an instinct that fuels every cell within the rose. To be wanted, you must be less. The temperature should be kept cold for optimal development. The coldness of rejection, of hostile and pitying glances cast over a hated body, a coldness that creeps through the bones and lashes the vicious iciness to the flower's core. Light should be unrelenting, allowing every flaw and mark and sag to be stared at and warped and ogled. With this preparation, the bone rose will conceive a grotesque horror of its own flesh, of the skin and fats and all that makes a body present. It will tear and starve and leak until there is naught but bones, the hungry bones, so desperate to be touched, to be held, to be wanted. Patricia is beautiful at last, so sharp and narrow and hard. Her angles and creamy white entirety are the center of the garden for all to admire. But she strains and shakes and fears the wind that pushes and bends the brittle stiffness of the bones. It takes every drop of her strength to keep herself aloft, to not collapse in a heap of splintered femur and broken rib. There is not a single moment of her new existence that is not a shuddering, terrified effort. She is beautiful, and she cannot allow herself to lose that at any cost. She cannot shatter into fleshy ugliness again. The bone rose, properly cultivated, will be a fearful and wonderful centerpiece for a carefully tended mortal garden. Cultivation notes for Sicarium Leopold, commonly known as the cutaway tulip. At the edges of the mortal garden, if one is lucky, one may find the rare cutaway tulip, the pride of any diligent gardener. While easy to grow to a small size with some casually applied insecurities, creating a true masterpiece of carved and peeled and sculpted flesh requires a lengthy and involved cultivation. The soil can be anything, mulched in hostility to self-worth, and light and temperature must simply be kept at a level to allow for the appropriate growth of an obsession. An obsession. It's the changing and hacking of itself, that from stem to root to petal it cuts and breaks and sticks itself into ever new configurations, each a new summit of repulsive symmetry and stomach-churning perfection. Perfection, sought in the blade and shears of the gardener, or the edge wielded by its own wildly waving roots, eagerly digging into a knotted and knitted form and pulling itself apart. The cutaway tulip's growth is less reliant than other blooms on the moment-to-moment terror of themselves, the sharpened, pointed fear of a form you're appalled to look upon. Instead, what must be grown and fed and watered is the lingering, nagging dread of falling short of what could be. At the final, glorious culmination that a body may someday achieve, the ever-retreating perfections that sit always on the tip of a knife. But also growing with the flower must be that other dread, not of perfection to be hunted, but of decay to be fled. The wrinkled, graying, translucent marks of encroaching mortality, a body that seeks to turn all that looks like you into a moldering parody, in their fearful slicing and desperate stabbing that is no longer to seek the golden promise of an eternal beauty, but a tearful attempt to rewind a spring that ticks itself ever looser with every snap of the clock face. Leopold is aware of what he has become, of the bleeding, twitching caricature of a human body he inhabits. But as much as he is scared to his roots of the next form the shears will chop him into, even more he fears the spreading stagnation that moves through his stem-like rot. The start of a decline that can only be postponed by the mutilating torments of his gardener. He would cry, but he has no idea where his tear ducts are anymore. While initially a very intensive and time-consuming flower to grow, a well-cared-for cutaway tulip can stand as a torn and wretched testament to a gardener's skill, especially if successfully brought to the point where it begins to operate and dissect itself. The mortal garden grows and twists and screams and bleeds. It is loved by the hands that tend it, but that love sows only misery and fear. It is the worst place that has ever been beautiful, and it should not exist.